Hey there, this is Dennis Anyone with Dennis Hensley. It's a podcast about making things up and making things happen. I love talking to creative people about their work, but also the life of a creative person, the ups and downs. I made this choice for my own life, and I'm always looking for other people to commiserate with and to sort of say, yeah, no, it was cool. It was worth it. You should do that. Today, my guest is one of my heroes as a writer, Paul Rudnick. I first read his stuff in Premiere Magazine as his alter ego, Libby Gelman-Waxner. Since then, he's written novels. He's written movies like Addams Family Values, plays like Jeffrey and Jeffrey the Movie, and In and Out, and so many different things. And he's got a new novel out called What Is Wrong With You? It's wonderful. I finished reading it this morning. I'm still a little ruddy because I may have cried at the end. And I was so excited to talk to him about it. In fact, he was so generous with his time, it's going to be a two-part episode. So this is part one. But before we get to the interview, I want to remind you that if you like this podcast, there's a few ways you can support it. You can go to DennisAnyone.net and leave a tip in my virtual tip jar, help me cover my expenses. There's also a thing on there called Buy Me a Coffee, which is self-explanatory. You can also become a subscriber to DNR Studios. I'm part of a group of shows under the Derek and Romaine banner, and for a monthly fee, you get my show and all these other cool queer shows. And it's really cool. So learn about that at dnrstudios.com. The other thing you can do is I now have a Patreon. So once a week, I'm going to drop an extra episode with some fun stuff. Maybe some So This Happened anecdotes, some flashbacks to my magazine days. I'm also going to talk about sort of the happiness research that I'm interested in and learning about. I'm going to have observation deck questions from people I've interviewed. It's going to be fun. And you can subscribe to that. It's going to be $5 a month. You can go to patreon.com and search for Dennis Anyone. And I'd love to see you there. All right, enough of the plugs. Here now is part one of my interview with Paul Rudnick. Joining us from Long Island, it's writer Paul Rudnick. Welcome to the podcast, Paul.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
My face looks a little ruddy, maybe because I just finished reading the last chapter of your book, and I got so moved that I started crying. So, so I'm excited to talk to you about it. Yeah.
Sure. No, but I love that. I love all sorts of responses, but that's one of my favorites.
I found it very moving. I cry at the drop of a hat now. Something about the age I'm at and the times we're living in, like it doesn't, but your book touched me a lot. The novel's called What Is Wrong With You? And when you were starting it out, I read that you kind of like to let the characters take you where they're going to go, that there's not a lot of outlining and things like that. But it sounds like you were interested in writing about the nature of love. Or what were you thinking about when you started? What was your sort of jumping off point?
Well, the spark, oddly enough, was a random blog post that I read a few years ago from a guy who was so clinically depressed. He hated his life. He hated his job, his romantic prospects, his family, everything. And I'm almost worrisome, but it didn't seem quite suicidal because he was performing.
Right.
But I felt, heartbroken for him. But I also immediately thought, okay, what would make that guy's life better? How could I cheer him up in a way that I could justify, that wouldn't seem like, some sort of pablum or nonsense? And I have no idea who this guy was or how it happened on my feed, but that was this weird spark. So I took a character, a very central one, who was at a very dark moment in his life. And then it became, and I thought, no, I don't want to just say with that point of view. I wanted a full range. And I'd never written something with this wide a cast of characters. And that was exciting because I thought, okay, let's see how many people I can inhabit and how many perspectives I can collect. So it was, and then it very quickly became clear that love was the thread. That love was what was drawing all these people together and what they were all after in one form or another, whether it was marriage or flirtation or widowhood or love in an age of high tech. It just seemed to be, the most common thread of all. So yeah, it was an adventure, but I always let the characters do the driving.
I love that. The central character I think you're talking about is Rob. He's a 60-ish book editor, and I related to him a lot because at one point it seems like it's all over. It feels like he's lost everything. And it really touched a chord with me because I was having lunch with a friend recently, and this is a challenging time for me and a lot of my peers, especially in media and entertainment. And I was kind of talking about some of the stuff I was dealing with, and my friend goes, things can unravel quickly. And I was like, yes, they can unravel quickly.
Oh, yeah.
And that's kind of what this moment feels like, which I think is what really resonated for me. So Rob is one of the characters, and one of the things I love most about this book, and I don't think I've seen it depicted before, especially this vividly, is the relationship between Rob and his straight trainer, Sean. This big musclehead guy who's had some success as an actor, but he's the trainer. And I've had straight trainers before, and I love those guys. And the nature of that relationship is really unique. And I loved Sean. I loved reading about him. I loved reading about what he struggled with. He moved me a lot. And I was thinking about my straight trainer friends and that dynamic. There's something really special about it. What was it about that relationship that made you want to write it? Have you had trainers yourself?
Oh, yeah, but it's everything you just said that was that so eloquently, because I thought it's between this friendship between a gay guy and a straight guy, and they enjoy each other. It's not a barrier. And something I found in straight guys, sometimes on the coast where they tend to be a little more open to every kind, all sorts of friendships, but they're curious. They have this kind of great heterosexual confidence, which means they're not threatened by strong, mouthy women or strong, mouthy gay men. They enjoy the back and forth. And so there have been some guys, and one in particular, who they're so charismatic. Also, when they're trainers, and this guy's a gym owner as well, they love working with people and they love helping people. They're not bullies. They're really cheerleaders for their clients. And I love that kind of interaction, that deep personal investment. And I think that also keeps them open in a lot of ways to all sorts of experiences because they're interested in it. They want to know about their clients' lives. So Rob and Sean are this insane but very devoted team. And I love that there are other people who are around them in the gym who eavesdrop on their conversation and can't figure out what's going on. They don't know, are they exes? Are they brothers? Are they, just a client and a boss? And because they sound like all of the above. They're also, I think there's something when you're in a physical environment, when you're both wearing shorts and a t-shirt, when sort of all bets are off and you're not on any sort of good behavior. Yeah. And that's something else that I think Sean and Rob love about each other. They can really trash talk and talk about their spouses and their romantic interests. And it gets a little down and dirty in a way that I adore. And I think that straight guys sometimes love talking to gay guys because gay guys will go there. Yeah. There's a freedom. Yes. There's a sense of, okay, say the dirtiest thing you could think of and I will go farther.
Yes. And there's a point where Sean is starting to speak the language of the gays, like Rob's kind of being down in the dumps. And at one point, Sean says, what else you got going on, bitch? Like he throws that around. And it's like, I related to that a lot. I've had that dynamic with friends. And I think as the gay guy, you get, the professional support around the job of a trainer and all of that. But I think they get something out of it as well. I felt like my straight trainers got something out of being my friend.
I think that they love a certain insight. They also love a kind of cultural exchange. The one thing that I find
freedom. They got to show others
adorable with straight guys.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
They get to show some other sides of themselves. They get also because and it's not a flirtation in any way. It really is much more sort of basic than that, so that they can really sometimes, unleash about whatever else is going on in their life. But there's a moment that I always adore with these straight guys, even the ones who are the most accepting and the most sort of not just queer friendly, but kind of queer adoring, that they'll use all the language and all the, code words, and then they'll trip themselves up because of various pop reference points. Yeah.
They'll say, what was that Julia Roberts movie? Pretty Girl? And the gay guy just cringes.
Yeah.
And I love it when you go, okay, you are straight after all.
That's right.
Yeah. And that there are sort of epic holes in their cultural reference points. But that's part of the fun. It's also because I think the gay guys and straight guys can surprise each other.
Yeah.
By the overlap and the entertainment factor of realizing, oh my God, that's what it's like to be a straight guy. That's why he's helpless around women, hates them other times,
Right.
why they drive him nuts. And also, the other thing the gay guys and straight guys have in common, of course, is they're very judgmental, and they'll look around the gym and, everyone gets a rating.
Right. Have you had various trainers over the years? Do you work with trainers, or is this based on anyone in particular?
I have. And they've been almost all been wonderful. There's one who Sean at least partially inspired. I mean, nobody specifically based on a real guy, but he's absolutely wonderful. He's just the funniest and the most unfettered, and also really good at his job. He's really, you're not just there to chat.
Yeah.
I also once worked out with a female bodybuilder. I mean, hardcore, and she was amazing because and I learned all sorts of things because, of course, there's a set of straight guys who are obsessed with female bodybuilders. So she was always having to fend off the strangest offers.
Yeah.
And it was so interesting to hear what she went through because she was a nicest person. And I thought, no, she was not going to accept $10,000 to step on someone wearing spike heels.
Right.
It's an interesting, I think it's now probably all around the world and certainly across this country where you can make a living in the sort of physical gym sphere, that it's a great place for people who, these people, they have degrees in exercise physiology and stuff like that. So it's a way to put it to work. And a lot of them are very entrepreneurial. They really build a business. But I think it's a job that requires a certain real personal charisma because you look around the gym and you say, ooh, who's that? I want to work out with him or her, because they just have a magnetism. Plus they're, often great specimens, great calling cards for their profession.
Yeah, I host this benefit show at the Gay and Lesbian Center here in LA called The Mismatch Game, which is a comedy game show. Done it for 20 years. It's a lot of fun. I remember once my straight trainer, Jalen, came to the show, and he got to be a contestant on the stage, and he's hot. And so the drag queens on the panel were kind of, trying him. It ended up, Jalen was willing to take off his shirt on stage if people would bid a certain amount for the center. So he took off his shirt on stage, and they raised like an extra, $200 or $300 for the center. But that was like a pinnacle of the gay straight crossover trainer thing. And it was like, and it made everyone feel good. It was like everyone won.
Oh, yeah.
I think of that moment when I think of the dynamic between your characters in the book. And also there was another trainer that somehow I ended up with multiple flesh jacks, those, self-pleasuring things. Cause they were trying to get promotion for it. I ended up with, and I gave one to my straight trainer, and then we would compare notes about it. I think that's very unique because his girlfriend was out of town for like 2 months. Anyway, that's another story. There's also a character in your book called Linda, who is married to Sean at parts in the book, a flight attendant, kind of rough upbringing in a way, like kind of known. She's not as super romantic. But I liked her strength and I liked her uncertainty. Can you talk about Linda and her, the life of a beautiful flight attendant and where that character came from?
Oh, yeah. No, I adore that character because she's somebody who, had a very tough time growing up and very negligent parents and has had a series of relationships that haven't gone so well. So she's very wary. She's very guarded and very smart. All of this is with the best reasons. She's not crazy. And so when she falls for Sean, she just can't quite figure it out. And she puts up every possible obstacle and he has to really win her.
Yeah.
And I find that very touching and very sweet. And, it's ultimately heartbreaking because she's someone who just isn't about to trust anyone. And I so understand that. I think almost everyone does, where you really, you start, especially as you get a little bit older, you start to worry about, okay, what am I opening myself up for?
Yeah.
And Linda really fights it tooth and nail and then surrenders and all sorts of things happen as a result.
Yeah.
And I think you see her working her way through it and she's, I think she's so strong, but she's also aware of her own craziness at times.
Yeah.
But that I just loved watching how navigated the world. That sense of, okay, a lot of guys are hitting on me. I'm used to that. I can handle that. What happens when I fall ridiculously hard for someone?
Right.
That is the biggest danger I could ever confront.
Right. And I can't control it. It's out of my control.
Yeah. And you know, I hope the reader's heart just goes out to her because she's really funny. You know, she also enjoys, there's the gay couple and the straight couple. And it's fun, you know, whenever you introduce your new crush or your new wife or your new spouse to your other friends, that's a very fraught moment. Yeah. And Linda handles it so beautiful. I mean, she's beautifully, because she's a flight attendant. God knows she's been around every kind of person on the planet. But she kind of enjoys everything about Sean until, you know, he does some things that really are not forgivable. And, I mean, I hope that it's also that thing of, I know a lot of people who loved that couple and who rooted for them and but understood what they went through.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, there are people who've told me they assumed the book was going to end one way and it surprised them by going in another very different direction. Yeah. And they understood that. Also, because I think when you're writing about love or any kind of romance, we're all very cynical with good reason and very jaded. And if you want to make a reader buy a romance and realize, okay, I'm going to invest in this particular relationship, you got to earn that. And I think Sean and Linda, it's very hard won, but you want them to succeed.
Right, for sure. I felt that tension a little bit in the way you wrote the book, which is that you wanted to write about love. You wanted it to, I think you wanted to say something positive, but you also didn't want it to be like a Hallmarky thing like that. You wanted that balance, right? You talk about the characters kind of leading you on your journey. Are you ever surprised? Do you ever think, this is going to happen? And then you get there and you're like, oh no, this isn't. Do you ever feel like sort of surprised by your own characters?
Oh, constantly. And I always look forward to that because I realize it's why I don't outline things in advance too thoroughly, because they make up their own minds. And suddenly I realize, oh my God, I so did not see that coming, but it's the only possible outcome for that character. And it's exciting because sometimes it's why I tend not to get too blocked. Usually I walk around, if I take a good walk, it'll help. I'll think, okay, what does Linda or Sean really want? What are they after? Yeah. What would they actually happen to them? Because they all become very real to me. But yeah, I always love it when it goes, it's funny because sometimes even now with the book, you know, I was finished writing it, you know, well over a year ago. I think back on it and it still shocks me at times because I think, oh my God, what have I done?
What have I done? What have I put into the world? Well, also you create you create all these different characters and then they all collide at this destination wedding in the last part of the book. So you're just like letting them loose on each other. And it's very fun once we all end up on that island.
Good.
There's a billionaire character in your book named Trone. And he's not a huge dick. Like he's not like what we think of as a tech billionaire in terms of our modern world. He's got more going on than that. Can you talk about that character and also just writing about the super wealthy generally? Because in your previous novel, Farrell Covington and the Limits of Style, there were uber wealthy people in that book as well.
Oh yeah, well there's a line actually. I think it's from the Philadelphia Story, the play and the film, where there's a journalist who says, and that piece is filled with very wealthy people who behave horribly. Right. And she says, you know, with the rich and famous, always a little patience. That I thought it seems a little too easy to just instantly condemn people who have advantages the rest of us can only dream of. And with Trone, I thought we're very aware of these gurus, and the world is fascinated by them, by Steve Jobs, by Elon, by Mark Zuckerberg, by Peter Thiel, all those guys. And a lot of them are nightmarish. On the other hand, they've changed our lives. Right. You know, these are guys who indisputably have done something that shifted the way we answer the phone or make a date or buy a car. And so that fascinated me. And I thought, okay, I want this guy to be both deeply strange, as I think all those men are. There's always that weird sense of they're on a spectrum all their own. Right. That they don't particularly, for people who often create products that mean so much to the rest of us, they're not good relating one-on-one. There's a real bubble surrounding them. And the richer they get, I always think the most dangerous point in anyone's life, especially when they're a movie star, is when they've been famous for longer than they haven't been famous. It means their feet no longer touch the ground and haven't for years. So that and when they try to, it's like hearing Scott Bessent, our Commerce Secretary, talk about groceries.
Yeah.
You know, you think, you don't use the word groceries. You don't buy your own groceries. But so there's that remove. But so with Trone, I thought I wanted to both reflect his strangeness, but also his intelligence, because I think you don't get to that level of accomplishment without being incredibly shrewd and often brilliant in certain ways that are way beyond me. So I wanted Trone to have both those sides to him, because I didn't want him to just be an easy villain. Yeah. And he's certainly not based specifically on any of those guys, some of whom are, world-class Batman horrors.
Exactly.
But with Trone, I thought, no, I want to see it's the goal, I think, of every writer and also every actor to understand the person that you're writing about or portraying from their point of view. People rarely think of themselves as evil or as monsters, but to see, okay, what would it mean to get through your day surrounded by that level of luxury, that level of service? Everyone's handing you things, opening the limo door. How does that change you? Or are you so unique that in some strange way it doesn't change you? That's just how you live. And that Trone also comes from a very poor background. He's totally self-made. And that's always on some basic level impressive. It's part of the problem with Trump. He's not self-made. It was all given to him. Yeah. But then you look at someone like Steve Jobs and you go, okay, you were weird on the most cosmic level, but look at what you accomplished.
Yeah.
And yes, I think you treated people often very badly, but you also gave an enormous opportunities to the world that just weren't there before. So Trone's more like on that end of the guru scale. Also, I think that it always fascinates me to figure out at any given time in history, what's the peaking city? Is it New York, LA, Silicon Valley, whatever?
Right.
And who are the stars? And for quite a while now, those have been our stars, those tech guys, and the occasional woman, and the occasional gay guy. But that they are the figures who everyone fixates on and fetishes about and often hates. But they are, whether you like it or not, the guys leading our culture.
They're running the show right now, for sure.
Yep, absolutely.
In ways that we can't even, I think, understand in terms of, like you said, dating and everything we do is touched by them. At one point, Trone, sort of looking at what makes him who he is, and the comment is made that he listens, like that he has extremely keen insights into what people want and need. Like he's so it's not a sort of self-obsession. It's a listening skill. And I thought that was really interesting.
Oh, yeah, because some of the most powerful people I've ever met, who are often seen as monstrous and are in many ways, but if they're really smart, you realize they don't just bluster and they don't just insist on getting their own way. They listen to everyone in the room. This was a lesson I learned a long time ago, that sometimes even a stupid person can have a really good idea. So listen to them, pay attention, stop just thinking, oh, I hate his shoes, so I'm not going to, take him seriously.
Right.
And that's what these people do. They really have a much bigger scope on the world, and they listen and they sort of accumulate data, and that's how they make a decision. It's not just on some spur of the moment or relying on their own sensibility. And I wanted Trone to have that sense of, okay, this is a guy. And it's shocking when you meet people like that, because you're in awe of them, or you hate them, or you're shaking, and they're looking you right in the eye, and and they make you feel like you're the only person in the world.
Right.
And they're asking your opinion, and you don't know what to do, so sometimes you just babble. But that it's that focus from someone of that power that's so unnerving, and can be its own form of charm. Yeah. It's unbelievable when you meet people who have these reputations, and suddenly they're being delightful.
Right.
And you just want to slap them and say, no, you don't get to do that.
Exactly.
You don't get to win me
You have to be
over.
a nightmare. Yeah.
Right, exactly. You're Hitler.
Yeah.
So it's, but I think most of those people have that ability because they didn't get there without it. That they know how to work the room.
Yeah.
And if they're really smart, they know how to read the room. They know how to go, okay. I mean, it's like what we're watching with Elon right now, where he suddenly can't figure out, why does so much of the world hate him? He's so used to being worshipped and followed. And now, no, you've made some huge mistakes, and he's flailing.
Yeah.
And I thought, that shows the limits of that kind of brain and that kind of behavior. But with Trone, I think you see him, he's just hyper aware.
Yeah.
I think people have an ability to absorb more information than the rest of us.
Yeah. I haven't spent a lot of time around really wealthy people, but there were a couple of experiences I've had where I've been kind of in that world a little bit, and they weren't that fun. And I sort of looked around and I thought, wow, it's almost like wealth has become their whole personality. Like they have that watch because it's the most expensive one. They like that refrigerator because it's the one that's the hardest to get. Like it's almost like defines them in a way. Like there's nothing left from when they didn't have money if they were somebody that wasn't. It wasn't like, oh, but I still love pickup basketball. No, I go to the fancy trainer with the injections, and what I'm like, it almost becomes their personality in a way. And it wasn't that much fun. Maybe if I had the money and I was part of it, but it didn't feel fun to me, that world, the way I thought it would. I don't know.
Oh, no, absolutely. Especially there's still a level of desperation where you think, wait, you've got so many billions that if your life fell apart tomorrow, you'd still be fine. You can pay the rent, that kind of thing. And yet they still feel that something's lacking, and they live in constant fear of making a mistake, and they just seem sort of pathetic after a certain point. But then there's a very rare group that have a kind of genuine confidence, and who weirdly usually don't have all those trappings. Yeah. They'll travel well. They'll spend the money on making their lives simpler and more direct.
Yeah.
But they're not flashy. They don't wear the Rolex. They don't have the penthouse. They don't have the estate. They just have whatever that initial drive was.
Yeah.
Those guys are amazing and scary because you realize they're the mega brains.
Yeah, they can do anything. Yeah.
They're 12 steps ahead of you or more. But the ones who are who kind of lucked into it or worked hard, but they don't know what they did to get there. And so they need to rub your nose in it. Everybody else's nose is in it. That's sad. And it's not particularly appealing. You don't think, oh, I wish I was that. I wish I lived there.
Yeah.
Sometimes mostly you think, okay, I wish I had their money so I could pay the phone bill.
Exactly. Speaking of 2025, I did some travel writing for a period of time, and I remember going to this really nice resort in Puerto Rico. And we didn't even stay overnight there. We just went to visit for the day. And I walked around and I'm like, you know what? Rich people's stuff is just better. It just is. Like, I felt like Gwyneth Paltrow. I was like, oh, the way the sand is on the thing. Like, it's just like, you know what? Yeah, it's just better. It's just better stuff. In all your writing, even from when I first read you in Premiere as Libby Gelman-Waxner, you've always had an eye for design details, fabrics and sconces and the kind of wood. And you must naturally have a liking for that stuff. Or I assume you must, because it's too much work if you don't, because you do it so brilliantly. Do you love like design, fashion, furniture, things like that? Are you interested in all that stuff naturally?
In a sort of obsessively fetishizing way, in that I don't particularly want to own any of it, but I love those details and both for the pure beauty of it. When you page through, the shelter porn of what used to be, things like Architectural Digest, when those magazines were far more prominent, where you go, what I love most of all was when I look through real estate, or you go through Zillow now, which has replaced the shelter magazines, and you say, well, if I had $28 million, I wouldn't buy that penthouse. That's trash.
Right.
And so you think, you don't have 20 million, but I love having that, the fantasy of it. And I think that rich people, because they also do have that constant nervousness of being judged, I'm more than happy to do that judging, to say, oh, is that what you're wearing?
Yes.
Oh my God, you got the porcelain bowl. Oh my God, Lord, what kind of yoga are you doing now?
Yeah.
And Gwyneth Paltrow, who I kind of admire because she's often viciously attacked, and she really has figured out a way for it not to particularly bother her.
Yeah.
She goes about her business. She's been incredibly successful. She's also a great actress, but that she's got a kind of noblesse to her, that she's really regal, and and you are a peasant who she will graciously speak to on occasion. And that's kind of, and you look at like what poor Meghan Markle is going through. She needs a little bit more Gwyneth in her life.
Yeah.
But no, in terms of that obsession with detail, I do adore that. It's completely natural to me that from when I was little, I noticed the difference in people's homes and in their couches and in their throw pillows, and who was Pottery Barn, who was West Elm, and who was Bon Marché, and who was, higher up the furniture food chain. So it's sort of a disgusting habit, but I always think, I'm not hurting anyone.
You're not hurting anyone, and it adds so much detail and color to your thing. But I'm like, he is not looking every one of these things up online. He knows what they are because you're interested in it. When I was doing a lot of celebrity journalism, I was the worst at writing about the outfits. Like, because you always have to describe the outfit. And finally, I would just go to the actress or whatever, and I would get the tape recorder, and I'm like, okay, let's describe your outfit. And they would go, okay, the shoes are Prada, because I didn't have the eye and the knowledge, and I'd be just, tell me, what are you wearing? And I'd hold up the tape recorder. I finally figured that out.
Quick side note.
Yeah.
My dearest friend is a brilliant costume designer named William Ivy Long, who's got like 6 Tony Awards. And he taught me, because he's such a student of history. Yeah. I mean, he sends an actor out on stage and they're carrying a handbag or a suitcase. He packs that thing with everything the character would carry, because he knows he's done so much research, and he's got walls of, books on every conceivable kind of costume and fashion and architecture. And I thought that was such a lesson in make sure you know the detail, get the details right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
that's his job.
When we connected and I knew this interview was going to happen, and I was waiting to get the book to read it, I went back and listened to I Shudder, your book of, it's some are memoir, and then there's some other fun stuff in there along the way. Yeah. But you write about your friendship with William Ivy Long, and the scene in that book that made me burst into tears, literally, because it hit all my stuff, was he's struggling in New York, right? And his parents come up for a dinner, and they want him to go back. Can you talk about that scene? I found it so moving that he stood up for who he was in that way. And I don't know, it resonated. I think for anyone that chose to be the creative kid and not do the thing that was expected of them, right?
Oh, absolutely. Which, when you're from a deep Southern family, that's even tougher. But that was, I was very young. I met William when I was an undergraduate at college, and he was at the Yale Drama School. And he was one of the first people I knew who was going into the arts seriously to try and make a living. And that was so impressive and so daunting, because, and my parents were very supportive, but it was like, oh, no, you're never going to get a job as a playwright, as a novelist. That seemed impossible. But with William, he meant it. And he's also incredibly gracious and charming, and as Southern as all get out. But his parents were very particular and weird, and not weirdly, but it was that Southern tradition of very polite condemnation. Yeah. And I think there's also, from their point of view, I think there's a concern for your child and whether they'll be able to have a career, whether people will be mean to them, all of that. But William was determined. And so I watched how he dealt with his parents, and when he gritted his teeth, and when he refused to back down in the most polite, Southern, genteel manner possible, and when he enjoyed his family. Because William had a wonderful sister, Laura, who was mentally handicapped. Right. And he took her everywhere. She had a beautiful singing voice, so he would have parties where she would perform. He treated her as a complete equal, and she just flourished. And they were so, devoted to each other. So everything about that, I thought, oh, okay, this is how a grown-up lives their life. And that was when I really was absorbing everything and realizing, okay, when when you don't knuckle under, and how you also can kind of conserve your anger for when it matters.
For when it matters.
We've all been around people who are constantly whining and spinning out and making a fuss, and after a while you tune it out. But then there are people who, when their voice gets low and determined, you pay attention because, this is where they're drawing a line.
Yeah. Well, neither of you had really had much success yet. You were both aspiring.
Yeah.
And we were all told you have to have something to fall back on. This is cute for now or whatever. Yeah. And I'm at a point where maybe they were right. Like, I've kind of run out of road in some ways, but I look back on the things that I've done and what kind of stuff I was a part of. And I'm like, yeah, that's what I wanted. But I found the part where he stands up to his parents. Like, there's a whole, I guess, he's supposed to go to grad school and do this and get married. And it's all planned out. And he says, Daddy, I'm doing what I want. I've told you a million times. I have to try this. This is who I am, or who I think I am. And I'm sorry if that upsets you or embarrasses you. And it goes on from there. I don't know. I find it so moving, but.
Oh,
go ahead.
No, when William told me those stories, when I was working, I was assisting him.
Yeah.
When he was an aspiring costume designer and I was an aspiring nothing. And it also, New York was much cheaper then.
Right.
But yeah, and William he told me about how he was in graduate school. He was going to become a professor. He was engaged to be married to a woman.
Yeah.
He was really on track for everything his parents had planned for him. And I remember he told me he went on vacation to, I think, Switzerland. He did one of those student Ural passes and went all around right before he was about to finish college or finish graduate school. And he stood on a mountaintop and he thought, I'm either going to jump and kill myself or I'm going to do what I want. And I think he was wearing a little Tyrolean hat with a feather, which was a detail I always loved. And so he went back home and didn't finish grad school and enrolled at a theater school. And it was such, oh my God, heroic to me to see someone who dared to do that with no net. I mean, he didn't have any money. He didn't have anything. So it was, now I always think of that time when William lived at the Chelsea Hotel on 23rd Street, back when it was a cockroach infested, house of horrors. It was incredible. And all the legendary people from, Mick Jagger to Walt Whitman had lived there, but it wasn't the sort of glamour destination it is now. But he would live there because people who he admired lived there. Right. There was a designer named, a couturier named Charles James, and William was sort of assisting him for nothing just to learn from him. And I thought, okay, William means it. And those were the people I wanted to be around. And I knew a lot of people then, all of whom had no money, no prospects, and were just determined. And that's who you want to be near. Because also that way you feel like we're all in it together.
Yeah, we're all in it together. When the LA fires happened, there was a post that happened somebody did on Facebook or one of the social media sites where they were just talking about Los Angeles. And he goes, a lot of people put it down, but I fucking love it. It's the place where every creative black sheep from every family came to make stuff. And I was like, yeah, it is. It is. And sometimes it's going okay and sometimes it's not. What was it like for you and William when you both started to succeed? Was it like, oh my God, we're fucking doing this. We're pulling this off.
It was shocking because it took a long time and a lot of trial and effort and, eating saltines for an entire day and for an entire year. And I remember when William's real big break was the Broadway original production of Nine, the musical,
right,
in which he had this opportunity suddenly to show everything he could do. The first act was all the most gorgeous black dresses you've ever seen, and then it burst into color, and so it was a real showpiece for him. And he won the Tony, and it was thrilling because you thought the level of chance and luck involved, that you would be offered this show, even though he'd spent his whole life preparing for that opportunity, but that it should come and so that everything should fall into place. And Tommy Tune was directing and choreographing and made him the offer, and he might not have been the first choice, but it was that sense that this is possible. Right. This could happen. And then maybe a year or so later, I went through various experiences that were both desperately unhappy. And then out of nowhere when my play Jeffrey was done off Broadway. Yeah. And Jeffrey had been turned down by every theater across the country, every theater in New York. Nobody wanted to touch it. They thought it was a comedy about AIDS, was how they refer to it. They had way too many prominent central gay characters.
Yeah.
And it took, years for that to finally a little theater on 23rd Street run by a great guy named Kyle Rudnick took that chance.
Yeah.
And it was set for like a 2-week run. And every actor was warned away from it because it was so gay, and they were told by their agents that it would ruin their careers.
Right.
People who we had, who were fantastic, just wanted to be there. And they were, people like John Michael Higgins, Harriet Harris, Tom Hughes, who went on to have wonderful careers.
Right.
Which I hope their agents realized. But it was, so it was a total surprise when the show got terrific reviews and moved for a commercial run and became a movie. Totally unexpected. And it was the strangest concurrence, because it was a play about how New Yorkers and how gay men were dealing with AIDS and with their wits. And I really wanted to pay tribute to all the people I knew who there were, no medical treatments, no media attention,
right.
Total government ignorance, and they were getting by and they were taking care of the people they loved. And I thought, okay, I want to be worthy of this material. And so it was the first time I felt involved in every level as a writer. And I remember sitting in the audience on a little wooden bench, and I was crying and I don't cry. And I thought, okay, if this is rejected, if the world doesn't at least understand this, I'm going to be really upset. Right. So that when things went well, it was just, I always think the highest form of happiness is relief.
Yeah.
It's not,
yeah.
It's not a drug. It's when you realize, oh my God, I could have stepped off the cliff and something held me back.
I'm still here.
So yeah, it was, and also because I was surrounded by people who were going through exactly what I was going through, including Maimadi and all of our friends, that it meant something. Yeah. And you suddenly said, okay, this counts. I've been writing other things that were just trying desperately to make a living.
Yeah.
This was something that wasn't making me a penny, but mattered. And it was, just that moment where you think, I am in the midst of all this tragedy and this horror. I'm also so lucky to be here and to be able to reflect it in some way. So yeah, it was, I think it's true for everybody. It's always a strange route. You never know what's going to click or what's going to work. Yeah. A lot of the stuff that is where, billions of dollars are spent and it's surefire and you're being, given every luxury are the biggest disasters.
Yeah.
So it's, probably one of the very few things I've learned in my life is you never know. And you you want this life. If you want to, live by the constant challenges of the arts and show business and all that, you gotta have the toughest skin and you gotta keep going and you gotta keep thinking of the next thing so you don't fixate on whatever current
on how
failure.
This thing goes or what happens with this. In I Shudder, you tell some of these stories from your adventures in Hollywood. I didn't know the Sister Act was your idea. I've always followed your career, and I'm like, oh shit, Sister Act was his idea. You ended up with your name not on the movie. There's a guy named Joseph Howard.
That's me.
That's you.
That was my pseudonym, which I remember. No, I wrote Sister Act for Whoopi Goldberg.
Right, and it was your idea.
Not for Whoopi Goldberg, for Bette Midler.
Right.
Sorry. No, it was written for Bette. She was sort of at the peak of her movie star. I adored her. And so it seemed like the perfect, because I remember thinking the initial spark was, I thought, okay, men in drag are pretty reliably funny.
Right.
I thought women in drag was another matter entirely. A lot of this has to do with gender roles and audience response and stuff. And I thought, okay, but a woman in a 3-piece suit is somehow not as instantly entertaining as RuPaul. And, so I thought, what's an equivalent of female drag? And the idea of Bette in a nun's habit seemed instantly comic and sort of, delicious. And I worked on it for like 3 or 4 years. Bette, and God bless her, she has since apologized for this.
Right.
She kept turning it down because she said she didn't think the audience would accept her as a nun. And everyone involved kept explaining to her, Bette, you're not playing a nun. You're playing a show disguised as a nun.
Yeah.
That she was somewhere else. And I was sent to a convent. I did all this research. There was a wonderful moment where I told the Disney executives that, a lot of lesbians become nuns as a refuge. And that was never going to appear in Sister Act. But it was a very wild experience. And I still know a lot about the Catholic Church for a gay Jewish boy.
Right.
And it was, so when the movie finally came out, it had become so far from what I intended, which was something far more subversive.
Right.
In which the power of showbiz and sequence would kind of undermine a lot of Catholic dogma.
Right.
That I didn't feel comfortable having my name on it. And I remember the studio, I had the legal right to put a pseudonym on the film.
Right.
The studio had to approve it. And the first name I suggested was R. Chasuble, which is from The Importance of Being Earnest. There's a priest named Reverend Chasuble.
Right.
Well, try explaining that to a Disney executive. and then I said, well, can it say screenplay by Goofy?
Yeah.
Didn't go over well.
No.
And then on that phone call, I made up the name Joseph Howard because Joseph was a character in an early novel of mine, and Howard is my brother's middle name. So, and he sounds like someone who founded the Mormon Church.
Yes.
Was vanilla enough that Disney said, okay, you can use Joseph Howard. So it was quite insane because the movie did incredibly well commercially. And then I remember when they did the sequel, they contractually put, based on characters created by Joseph Howard, someone who doesn't exist. And now there's the stage musical. So God love it because I do benefit, financially from every version of it. But but yeah, it was one of those ideas that I had on my couch in my apartment in Greenwich Village, where I just pictured bed in a habit. And if there is a lesson in all that, I don't know what it is.
Right. But if you wanted your name off it, it must have been really frustrating, that whole journey. If you were like, okay, if you're willing to be like, okay, take my name off it. Like, that's, I mean, I've had a few journeys in this business with things where you're like, oh, this is my life's too short moment list.
Yep.
Yeah. The problem is you don't know which projects those are going to be at the beginning. You don't know what the life's too short projects are until you're way in over your head. Yeah. But you also write about this crazy experience with Alan Carr. You write about working with Scott Rudin. When you're with larger than life characters and these Hollywood scenarios, what is your way of being? Are you pretty chill? Do you roll with it? Do you get nervous? Like, I don't know. How are you in the whole, when things get Hollywood crazy?
All of the above. First of all, I'm sort of addicted to large scale personality. So
you like it. So there's a part of you that's just watching and eating popcorn and
taking notes. Yeah. And you think, oh my God, how did someone actually operate at that level? Because there's a hum where you realize they just have their motor runs much hotter than the rest of ours, and they're sometimes very impressive and insane.
Right.
But so I think I also try. I think sometimes if you're around people who have, substantial arsenals of craziness, is you talk to them as if they are a person. You say, okay, we are both going to pretend that we are human beings. And so I know that you're about to throw something at me or yell at me or whatever.
Right.
But let's not do that. And sometimes they respond. It's sort of like being the horse whisperer a little bit.
Right.
Because some of those people I admire endlessly. And Alan Carr was particularly mad. But because I remember in the story that I tell and I shudder, that he had a rock of cocaine hanging out of his nose that was like the size of the Matterhorn. He was nothing but nice to me. And I thought that's not the same as the way he treats some of his underlings. But it was, that ended in that insane moment where I was on his yacht in Miami.
Right.
And he told me, he was in his full caftan mode. And I was at the peak of his, he'd done Grease, he'd done Casual, he was really riding high. And he told me, Paul, because he knew who I was, he said, for the next minute, you can ask me any gossip question about anyone in Hollywood. I've worked with the biggest stars. I will swear to you, I will tell you the entire truth, everything I know. Go. This was the little gay boy's dream.
Travolta, go. Talk about Travolta.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, you think that's easy. Now, I went so blank. I froze. I couldn't, and I just, sputtered for 60 seconds. Nothing came to mind. And then my time was up. Yeah. And I felt like, the biggest Jeopardy loser of all time. I thought, I've missed my door, my opportunity, my window, whatever. That, But it was hilarious because Alec Carr also, I think, knew what he was doing there. He was, he was smart and insane.
Yeah.
And, I mean, those are those lives where you think, okay, what Nora Ephron's parents told her, which was that everything is material.
Yeah.
So I think also one of the reasons anyone goes into the arts or show business is to be around people who are electric and appealing and incredibly creative and who will drive you up the wall.
Yeah.
That's what you're signing on for. And I think it's what, when you're a kid and you're reading now you'd be reading on scrolling, but when you hear about these personalities and you think, what would that be like, to meet them? And sometimes you meet them and they're horribly disappointing or just very short.
Yeah.
And then sometimes there's a handful where you meet them and they are every bit as amazing as you dreamt. And that's why we do it.
Was there a Hollywood project that was charmed, was a dream? Everyone was relatively reasonable and it worked out.
There were some. I mean, did nothing without bumps along the way, but something like In and Out was a pleasure because it was such a good. Frank Oz was directing, and he's the sweetheart of all time, and he understood the material and understands comedy. Scott Rudin was producing it, and he made that project happen. I mean, because he was one of the few openly gay producers in Hollywood, and he used the clout he'd accumulated from his many successes to tell the studio, we are making this movie. We are not making the main characters secretly straight.
Right.
This is the story we're telling. So he really protected that material. He also cast things at a wonderfully high level because we did the Addams Family movies together too, which could have been sort of crap fests, but he was the one who said, no, Angelica Houston, Raul Julia, Christina Ricci, let's go for the best. And on In and Out, where we had Kevin Kline and Joan Cusack and just everyone. And we were shooting it on the East Coast, which was pretending to be Greenleaf, Indiana, which no one questioned. We shot for Malibu. There's a town in New Jersey called Deal, where a lot of gangsters lived in the 1920s. But it looks like Malibu, and no one ever questioned it. And so we had a really good time. And there was a sense of camaraderie. Also, because Kevin Kline, who's not only a brilliant actor, but because he's from the theater, it tends to cut down on the lunacy and expenditure level where he's not separated from everyone else by an entourage.
Right.
Tom Selleck actually also was delightful.
Yeah.
And Joan Cusack is a gift from the gods. But I remember the day we were shooting, there's a big climactic kiss between Ken
You write
and Tom
about
Selleck.
it in I Shudder, yeah.
Yeah. And we were shooting it on a big highway intersection in New Jersey, and the cars were all backed up because we were blocking traffic. And I thought they have no idea what Kevin Kline and Magnum P.I. are up to. And those two actors did not protect themselves. They really went all the way with the kiss. And it was like we were all in the club together, which, gay and straight people working on that movie. And so it was exciting. And that one, I think it was a question of also sometimes when you've built up a little bit of clout, sometimes you can use that to make the next project a little easier. Sometimes it blows up in your face because sometimes you're suddenly handed way too much money.
Yeah.
But In and Out went very well. And even when we were doing the movie of Jeffrey, which was an indie project for no money, no one was getting paid, which means that everyone behaved wonderfully. We had all these big stars, and Patrick Stewart, who's also not just the nicest man, but I watched how, I saw this with Tom Selleck too, how they dealt with the constant crowds and the adoration. And they were both so great with people. And I thought, okay, that's how you do that.
Yeah.
And we shot it all over New York without any permits and just got it done.
I love it. Guerrilla filmmaking. Did you get chased away from any locations or anything like that? Did anything kind of unfold like that?
Yes, because well, at that time in New York, there was a scam going on, which it was so awful that I almost admired the people perpetrating it,
right.
Which was if you were shooting outdoors anywhere in New York, and we were shooting in Sheridan Square at one point, there would be homeless people who would start screaming and banging bottles and pots together and not shut up until you paid them to stop.
Right.
And I thought, they're smart. They know that there's a time clock here and that we have to get this done, and the light is going. So you'd pay them. Well, it would be $50. Something I didn't remember. This was a while ago. But it was, those are the perils of guerrilla filmmaking.
Right.
Where you realize nobody wants you on their blocking, because you're going to get in the way of them carrying their laundry home, which I understood.
Yeah.
But it was, Yeah, it was just sort of seat of your pants and do what will work.
Do what works. In LA, it's the leaf blowers that you're always paying off, the leaf blowers.
Yes.
I was reading What Is Wrong With You yesterday in the gym on the life cycle, and it was a very moving scene regarding Rob and his husband Jake, and I'm just crying on the life cycle, and I'm like, it's not like a gay gym. Like I was like, whatever. Do you ever cry when you write? Does it ever move you?
No, because I think I'm always too totally invested also in what's happening next and, oh my God, and trying to do it justice so that I don't have that distance. Also, I'm kind of whatever version of a late adapter this is, where I cry years later. You know, it's like that might be
the headline of this, the pull quote for the title of this episode. So you cry years later, like about the work, or like how does that work?
About everything. I find I was doing it. Somebody's making a wonderful documentary about writers and actors and everybody how they dealt with the AIDS crisis, and I was being interviewed on camera, and being straightforward, and I started to cry uncontrollably. And I really shocked myself, and I kept trying to stop and say, no, I'm not a slobbering mess.
Right.
And I couldn't. And I thought, where all of this stuff I was talking about had been 20, 30 years earlier.
Yeah.
And it was hitting me. And that's why when I think about 9/11 now, I have the same response. It's like, oh, I guess it takes you a couple of decades, Paul. But it's, it's when you suddenly get that kind of perspective, because I think when you're in the heat of that moment, or when I'm writing about it,
right,
it's so alive that it's like you don't have time to cry.
Right.
You know that you're just writing it, and so. But it's, and I don't know if anyone else says that, but it's particular to me where I realize, because it overcomes me, and I try to be enough of a control freak for that not to happen, but then there it is, and it just destroys me. And I realize it's a good human response, and maybe it shouldn't take me so long.
Yeah.
But, and it's why when I read books or go to the theater or the movies and something moves me and I realize I'm crying and I think, oh my God, that doesn't happen so often. This is good.
Yeah.
I try to be a tough cry.
You're a tough cry. I like that. I appreciate it. Thanks again to Paul Rudnick. Pick up his book, What Is Wrong With You? It's delightful and hilarious and very moving. And we'll have more with Paul next week, part 2, coming up. But let's get on with So This Happened. So This Happened, I got to go to an FYC screening of Mid-Century Modern, the new Hulu sitcom from the creators of Will and Grace, with Nathan Lane and Matt Bomer and Nathan Lee Graham. And it was at the Directors Guild. It was very fabulous. And it was packed. Every gay in town was trying to get in. My friends and I that invited me, we had to sit separately because it was so busy. But we got to be there. They showed 2 episodes. It was really enjoyable and a lot of fun. And then they had a panel. And I was trying to remember what was jumped out at me about the panel. Nathan Lee Graham, who is actually a former guest on this podcast, if you think back, he had a flight attendant show. I think it was called LA to Vegas that he was on, and I got to interview him. He's good friends with my friend Matt Zarley. And anyway, he was on the panel, and I think the thing I remember about the panel is they were talking about auditioning different characters, different actors for that character that Nathan Lee Graham played. And one of the creators, maybe it was Max Muchnick, said that after they had read all the different actors with Nathan Lane, Nathan Lane said about Nathan Lee Graham, "Oh, it's him. He's the only one that scared me." And Nathan Lane in that moment looked a little bit like exposed, like was that a secret? But I think what I took from it was like Nathan Lee Graham was formidable. Like he could like go toe to toe with him, and that would always make for a better show with somebody that had that kind of authority and strength and talent. And I think the chemistry between the 3 of them is wonderful. And I'm really into the show. And also the food was amazing. There was such good food at that thing. So yay for Hulu. Like sometimes I feel like people would not vote for a show if the FYC food wasn't as good. You're like, I don't think I'm going to vote for that because, that pizza, those little pizzas were cold or whatever. Anyway, that's enough for this week. If you want more So This Happened and stuff like that, get on my Patreon. Go to patreon.com and search for Dennis Anyone. I'll have more sort of adventures like that and other fun things. So I appreciate it. All right. Before I let you go, I want to give a shout out to Oscar Rosario for mixing the episodes. My theme music is by Mark Daniels for Placement Music. We'll catch you next time on Dennis Anyone. Bye.